What's up, everyone? Tara Roberts here with FantasyPros, and we're talking Panic Meter. What players have us panicked in Week 16? But before we get started, if you want a chance to win a signed Deebo Samuel 11x14 photo courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video, and that's it. Make sure to turn on notifications to know when new videos drop and to find out if you've won. Now let's go ahead and dive right in. Let's kick things off by talking about the Panic Meter grades. The first grade is 0. This past week was not ideal, but it can be chalked up as an anomaly. Do not even think about benching them. For Panic Grade 1, panic is setting in, the leash becomes shorter, but said player is still in consideration as a starter. Just make sure you have a plan B. For Panic Grade 2, we are officially panicked, exploring trade options and possibly benching for a more proven, reliable option. For Panic Grade 3, fire sale, get rid of them for whatever you can before it's too late. They can no longer be trusted as a starter. They are a borderline drop candidate. And the worst Panic Grade is 4. Sever all ties, smash the drop button so hard that the man ends up in the shadow realm. Now let's kick things off at quarterback. Deshaun Watson, quarterback, Cleveland Browns. Are we panicking over Deshaun Watson? Absolutely. Watson is an incredible talent, and we assumed that talent would just jump right back into action. But it hasn't played out that way. Watson has had less than 20 fantasy points per game since he returned. He's had 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions in 3 games. He has failed to reach 300 yards in a game. In fact, he has failed to reach 200 yards in 2 of his games. He is an unreliable streaming option. And to make matters 10 times worse, he is playing in a game with weather concerns this week. The wind in this week's game against New Orleans is expected to be near 30 miles per hour with gusts over 60 miles per hour. That is insane. Neither team can really do anything well on offense right now, and add terrible weather to it, it is a recipe for disaster. Watson is QB 19 in total points since his return. He is averaging 12.1 points per game and is QB 27 in average points per game. Watson is a Panic Meter Grade 3. Avoid, avoid, avoid. Joe Mixon, running back, Cincinnati Bengals. Should we be panicking about Joe Mixon? Since his Week 9 performance, over 50 fantasy points in PPR, Mixon has had 0 touchdowns, less than 15 carries per game, and a max of 12 fantasy points. Now, he did deal with a concussion that caused him to miss 2 weeks, but he just hasn't been utilized in a way that you would expect from a guy that many people drafted in the first round. With the exception of the one huge Week 9 game, Mixon has been extremely average. He's had a total of 3 touchdowns outside of that week, and his usage has just been very inconsistent. His next 2 games are against New England and Buffalo. Mixon is a Panic Meter grade of 1. We're still starting him, but we don't necessarily like it. Isaiah Pacheco, running back, Kansas City Chiefs. What is the panic level for Isaiah Pacheco? Well, he is getting the bulk of the work on the ground and is technically the lead back. And since coming into his role as the lead back for Kansas City, he's had anywhere from 13 to 22 carries per game. But the problem is, that just really doesn't amount to big fantasy points within the context of the Kansas City offense. They are a pass-first team. And to make matters worse, the Chiefs trust Jerick McKinnon. McKinnon has had huge games, over 30 fantasy points in each of the past 2 weeks. This week, the Chiefs face the Seahawks, and this is another excellent matchup on the ground, but Pacheco just hasn't been able to capitalize on these good opportunities. I am giving Pacheco a panic grade of 2. Limited upside, and he's just not a must-start option at this point. Antonio Gibson, running back, Washington Commanders. Antonio Gibson has been on a steady decline in fantasy points over the past 2 months. Just how panicked are we? Well, let's talk about it. Gibson has had less than 10 carries in the past 3 games, and less than 40 yards in each of those games. He has also had 0 touchdowns and a max of 3 receptions and has failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in PPR in the past 3 games. His counterpart, Brian Robinson, has been extremely effective on the ground, and he's had some mild usage in the pass game. This week, Washington faces San Francisco. I would feel extremely uncomfortable starting Gibson this week. Gibson gets a panic meter grade of 2. This is not a drop situation because he does face Cleveland in week 17, so all hope is not lost, but it's not looking great. Travis Etienne, running back, Jacksonville Jaguars. We talked about concerns around Travis Etienne last week, and those concerns are only growing. Has his panic meter level increased? Well, Etienne isn't being used as the running back we thought that he would be, an Austin Eckler-light kind of role. His carries have been strong, and he is the clear lead back, and he bounced back from a poor week 14 showing with 103 yards against a tough Dallas defense. But there's a major problem here. He's simply being phased out of the pass game. He had just 2 receptions for 24 yards, and that won't cut it. Etienne has had a max of 3 targets since week 8. This week, he has a tough matchup against the New York Jets, and I wouldn't start him. I am giving Etienne a panic meter level of 3. A good week 17 matchup against Houston is the only thing holding him together right now. Christian Watson, wide receiver, Green Bay Packers. It finally happened. Christian Watson didn't catch a touchdown for the first time since week 9, and the result was 4 receptions on 6 targets for 46 yards. Definitely a letdown. Technically speaking, he should have had a touchdown. Aaron Rodgers signaled to Watson at the goal line that he was going to throw Watson for the touchdown. Watson missed the signal. It didn't realize that the ball was being thrown to him. So, if he had seen and known Rodgers' plan, Watson would have had his 5th straight game with a touchdown. So all is not lost. This is not an issue of Watson falling out of favor or someone taking over his role. Romeo Doubs came back and nothing really changed. So despite the fact that the Packers relied heavily on their ground game, Watson still maintained a similar target level and was tapped for a clear touchdown. I'm not particularly discouraged by this performance. And this week he faces Miami. I am giving Watson a panic meter grade of 0. I'm not concerned, and I think his role is going to remain the same. Marquise Brown, wide receiver, Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray is out, and how much are we panicking about Marquise Brown? The targets have been steady for Brown since he returned to action. He's had 8 targets in every single game. But he has been extremely unproductive, failing to reach 50 yards in a single game and 0 touchdowns. The schedule to close out the season is friendly with Tampa Bay and Atlanta on deck, but this just isn't the same Marquise Brown that we saw at the beginning of the season. There's too much competition and not enough talent at quarterback to support it. Marquise Brown is a panic meter grade of 2. We can't drop him. There's likely nothing better on waivers, but he's just not a trustworthy start. DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver, Arizona Cardinals. Let's talk about the wide receiver opposite of Marquise Brown, DeAndre Hopkins. Like Brown, the targets have been fine and consistent. He's caught 7 of 11 targets in each of the past 2 games. Normally, that would be a perfectly fine stat line. But he's had 0 touchdowns. Hopkins is the clear wide receiver 1 of this offense, so if any touchdowns are going to come, he'll be the first look. But with no Kyler Murray, no Colt McCoy, and Trace McSorley likely getting the start, Hopkins does have some upside limitations. But given the fact that he's the first look and the upcoming schedule is good, I am giving Hopkins a panic meter grade of 0. He's still a fine start, just no longer a top option. Amari Cooper, wide receiver, Cleveland Browns. We talked about Deshaun Watson, so let's talk about the panic meter level for his wide receiver 1, Amari Cooper. Last week, Cooper had 4 receptions on 6 targets for 58 yards. We joke a lot about the Amari Cooper home-away splits, but the splits are real. And Cooper returned home to a surprisingly poor performance. Cooper has failed to reach double-digit fantasy points in PPR since Deshaun Watson's debut. 2022 just might not be the year for them. The chemistry just simply isn't there, and I don't see how this changes anytime soon. If there weren't weather concerns, Cooper's panic meter grade would be a 1. But considering the insane wins that we talked about earlier, Cooper gets a panic meter grade of 2. You need to consider benching him this week. Dalton Schultz, tight end, Dallas Cowboys. Let's wrap things up at tight end and talk about the panic level for Dalton Schultz. Schultz had 2 receptions on 4 targets for 15 yards in week 15. The problem is that Schultz struggles with consistency, with as high as 10 targets and as low as 4. And touchdowns go to backup tight ends at an oddly high rate. But the big problem here is that there's just too many mouths to feed in Dallas, and the Cowboys can simply rely on their run game. Schultz could easily have a bounce back game this week. In fact, that's actually his pattern after a poor outing. And it takes very little to be a tight end 1 these days. I am giving Dalton Schultz a panic meter grade of 0. It's not that bad, and you could do far worse at tight end. Thanks for watching this video. And remember, if you want a chance to win a signed Deebo Samuel 11x14 photo courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video and that's it. Make sure to turn on notifications to know when new videos drop and to find out if you've won.
Thanks for tuning in to the FantasyPros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at FantasyPros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.